Cyprus, a divided island. This is the so-called Green Line in Nicosia. Here, a United Nations force keeps apart the Greek Cypriots in the south of the island and the Turkish Cypriots in the north. A situation that's lasted 7 years since the Turks invaded Cyprus. Then there was bloodshed and bitterness as both ethnic communities were torn apart. Behind those communities were Greece and Turkey, countries with an important stake in this island, strategically placed in the Mediterranean. Today, the atmosphere on the Green Line has relaxed. Incidents are rare, deaths or injuries non-existent. The United Nations force throughout Cyprus has been cut by 2/3 to only 2,500 men. Now also, for the first time since the Turkish invasion, there are signs that serious negotiations for a lasting settlement may be on the way. The Turkish Cypriots called a meeting in early August where they put forward new proposals. Details of the proposals aren't known, but they could well mean returning some territory to the Greek Cypriots. In return, the Greek Cypriots could be asked to accept a federal government system giving equal status to both Turkish and Greek zones. The Greek Cypriot response has been predictable. They've rejected the initial proposals, but talks are to continue. They'll even be speeded up. Observers familiar with the world of Cypriot politics say the Turkish Cypriot proposals were very much a bargaining position, a move to start the process of meaningful negotiation that could last many months. The mood now is one of cautious optimism. As the negotiators posed for photographers, nobody was giving away too many secrets of specific proposals.
Is it for the BBC? Which one?
There have been peace plans before, and they've failed. But today in Cyprus, the conditions could be more favorable. The war 7 years ago produced thousands of refugees. Their plight at first was desperate, but many have found new jobs and new lives in different parts of the island. Passions have cooled. Caution is the watchword.
Yes, I have.
Can you tell us something about them?
I'm sorry, I cannot. As you know, they are secrets. And forgive me, but I have to safeguard the talks.
The atmosphere now seems a long way removed from the bitterness of 7 years ago.
Bye-bye.
When the Turks invaded, it was in response to a coup by rightist Greek Cypriots. The Turks feared that coup would result in Cyprus entering into a union with Greece. They feared that would lead to severe repression of the island's Turkish Cypriot minority. After Turkish forces landed on Cyprus's northern coast, they broadened their attack, sweeping aside the weak resistance of the lightly armed National Guard. Within a few days, the Turks had seized control of most of the north and the east of the island, enforcing the de facto partition that still exists today. The Turkish Cypriots demand that in any constitution, their zone should have equal status with the Greek Cypriot zone. That's a major obstacle for the Greek Cypriots. For the Turkish Cypriots form only 18% of the island's population, and the present partition gives them 40% of the territory. Both negotiating sides know they'll have to compromise over these complex questions, the ratio of population to territory and the structure of the constitution. This was Nicosia International Airport after the '74 invasion. The runways and aircraft fleet had been wrecked. Today, this airport, like other key areas of the Cypriot economy, will also be the subject of negotiation and compromise between the two sides. The Turks took control of the airport approaches during the war. Since then, they haven't been used. Today, the airport is like a wasteland. Its landing lights are smashed, weeds sprout through its tarmac, grass through its taxiways. And the hangars here are slowly rusting. Both Greek and Turkish Cypriots have built their own new airports. But strong UN resolutions have supported the Greek Cypriots, so it's only on their side that international flights have authority to land. It's likely the reopening of the airport would restore to Nicosia its prestige as Cyprus's capital and signal to the world that a lasting settlement is finally on the way. But until then, visitors can still find in one of the airport hangars an old Trident aircraft covered with dust and cobwebs and stripped for spares. A striking image of the waste and disruption caused by the island's partition. Any settlement would also have to cover the northern free trade port of Famagusta. If the Greek Cypriots get to hear that a cargo ship is called at that Turkish-controlled harbor, they automatically bar it from any future trading with the south. New factors have brought the Greek and Turkish Cypriots together to discuss these problems. Behind the latest round of activity is an industrious Latin American diplomat called Hugo Gobi, Special Representative of the UN Secretary General. Both sides have appreciated his discreet lobbying and painstaking groundwork.
Today a day of triumph for you?
We asked Mr. Gobi what he thought was the key issue in the talks. Had he achieved a breakthrough?
First of all, we have created an atmosphere of confidence, and I told everybody that we have the most civilized dialogue in the history of the intercommunal talks. Of course, to have a civilized dialogue is not enough, but this is an indispensable prerequisite in order to look for better solutions. And then now, after this period of dialogue, a little bit frustrating, if I can tell you, but now we are facing a new phase of the dialogue in which both sides are going to be more creative.
Are you confident?
It may well be thanks to Gobi's influence that the Turkish Cypriots now seem prepared to hand back territory like the once booming seaside holiday resort of Varosha, south of Famagusta. It's been a ghost town for the last 7 years, sealed off by the Turkish army, its restaurants and hotels deserted. UN troops patrol a no-man's land 2 miles wide that separates this town from the Greek Cypriot zone. They keep the peace between the thousands of Greek Cypriots who used to live here in Varosha and the Turkish army which drove them out and now prevents them from returning. And there's little doubt many want to return. 7 years after losing 2 hotels in Varosha, Marinos Kounas is busy extending a new one he built on a beach further south. But his heart is still in Varosha.
I don't know how much damage has been done by the looting. We know that there was systematic looting, but to what extent, I cannot be sure. I can be sure of what I can see sometimes with the binoculars from the area. But otherwise, I feel we can get the town within 9 months.
And you feel that everybody who used to live in Varosha will want to go back there?
Yes, I'm sure they will, because we are tied down with the town. It's our roots there. And Varosha was a beautiful place. So I'm sure we'll all be back.
Even for holidaymakers elsewhere within the Turkish zone, Varosha is forbidden territory. They can't cross the barbed wire fence that separates the other beaches from that strange and special ghost town. Apart from Varosha, the Turkish Cypriots are offering to hand back a chain of largely deserted villages near the buffer zone. So as many as 2/3 of all the refugees could return to their original homes. But Kirina and other major towns will remain in Turkish hands, part of a separate Turkish Cypriot state within a federal framework. Here, the Turkish Navy is much in evidence. The Greek Cypriots say the Turkish armed forces must eventually go. One idea under discussion could be a temporary United Nations police force to be brought in specially to replace them. With Turkey itself undergoing severe economic problems, the maintaining of troops here to police civilians may well prove a burden the Turkish government could do without. But what will remain is this monument on a beach 5 miles west of Kirina. This is where the invasion force came ashore. The monument commemorates those soldiers who died in the fighting. It will stay a reminder of Turkish nationalism. The Turkish Cypriots have already linked their economy to Turkey, and they've adopted the Turkish lira as their currency. Even a letter from the Greek zone to the Turkish zone has to pass through mainland Turkey. Yet many Turkish Cypriots say they want above all a settlement that will guarantee their security. They see themselves as Cypriots as much as Turks. The most devastating result of the Turkish army invasion of 1974 was the creation of 200,000 refugees, almost a third of the island's total population. By the end of 1975, most of the Turkish Cypriots in the south had been resettled in the northern area. But the Greek Cypriot refugee problem was on a far greater scale. At the beginning, there were just about 100,000 people in the open. Now, remarkably, there are only 8,000 people in the small timber huts of the camps. They have electricity, but no running water. Laundry, bathing, and toilet facilities are shared. There's some bitterness by those left that more hasn't been done. Here, extreme politics of the right and left flourish. The remaining refugees are nearly all elderly. They cling stubbornly to the hope that one day they will be able to return to the places where they were born. It's a gamble that may pay off. There are indications that they could be considered, by virtue of their age, to be no threat to Turkish security and allowed to go home. Many of the younger refugees have moved into the new, booming development areas. These new estates were erected by the Greek Cypriot government to rehouse refugees. The roads are paved and each house has electricity and running water. Many also have solar water heaters. The homes come in two sizes, 60 square meters or 45 square meters. That's small by Greek Cypriot standards, but exceptionally large families are given two adjoining houses. The land and buildings remain government property, but for the first year at least, the refugees pay no rent. Many Greek Cypriots don't consider these rented homes as permanent solutions. They want to go back to their former villages. Although many have set up businesses in new areas, they see it as just a temporary plan. Andreas Kosti is a cafe owner from Famagusta. A refugee, he set up business on the coast at Limassol. His small kebab stall has grown into a successful restaurant, catering to the tourists who still flock to this part of the coast. His enterprise is typical of many of those Greek Cypriots who were dispossessed in 1974. Andreas spent his first 18 months as a refugee under canvas. Now his new house is almost completed. The government's keen to encourage refugees to build their own homes. The refugee acts as his own contractor and hires what labor he needs. The government offers a basic design, a grant, and ensures that the building is up to standard.
Worked very hard.
But despite his brand new home and business, Andreas is prepared to give everything up to go back to Varosha. Why?
Well, for lots of reasons, really, you know. First of all, Famagusta is not sort of a home, it's your heart there, you know, and it's a place we come up, and definitely, in my opinion, it is 100 times better than Limassol. This is my opinion, of course.
And do most Greek...
The resilience and the resourcefulness of the Cypriots is shown in the recovery of the island's economy after the devastation of 1974. The Greek south, though, has recovered faster than the Turkish north. The Greek Cypriots have been more successful in finding new markets and restoring industrial production. Construction was boosted by the need to rehouse refugees and to re-establish the tourist industry. Building hotels to keep the tourists flowing in is vital to the island's economy because tourist receipts go a long way in reducing Cyprus's large trade deficit. Today, over 300,000 people a year visit Cyprus. The Greek Cypriot push to increase tourism and manufacturing seeks to provide employment for those who had formerly worked the land. Pushed out of the northern half of the island, many Greek Cypriot farmers are now landless. While many work in the towns, others farm whatever land they can. Some Greek farmers, by special arrangement, are allowed to farm up to the middle point of the buffer zone. As the tensions have lessened, the shepherds have a certain nonchalance about grazing their sheep in the no man's land between the Greek Cypriot and Turkish positions. Despite the calm of recent years, Turkish gun emplacements overlooking the valley are a reminder that this is still a potentially explosive issue. A reminder, too, of the bitterness that still divides this island. The Turks are well entrenched and have no intention of allowing their community to be dominated by the more numerous Greeks. Greek farmers who want to cultivate the rich soil of the buffer are guarded by UN troops. The land hunger of the Greeks explains their willingness to farm these potentially dangerous acres. The Cypriot economy is basically agricultural. Although they're harvesting beans here, the main crops are potatoes and citrus fruit. Before the economic disasters of 1974, agriculture employed 35% of the working population and provided nearly half of the island's exports. Despite the difficulties, including security, agricultural production has been largely restored. Citrus and cereal harvests have remained low because of reduced areas of cultivation, but other fruits and vegetables, particularly potatoes, have expanded. After so many years of talks, Greek resentment about their loss of land is still one of the key questions dividing the two communities and halting progress toward a solution. Rauf Denktaş is the Turkish Cypriot leader, admired by even his bitter opponents as one of the area's ablest politicians. He is being pushed by the Turkish government to seek a solution, hence the recent set of proposals.
What is necessary is that once we give the papers to sit and talk, whether the Greek Cypriots will sit and talk, I don't know, because they have this long-term struggle policy, which envisages whatever Turks offer, say it's not good enough, and resort to international forums. So we'll see, but these are difficulties.
And it's fair to say that security is of paramount importance for you?
Naturally, naturally.
And does that mean the Turkish army perhaps staying in Cyprus beyond the point of a settlement?
It means that we shall have to work out a guarantee system, as we had one under 1960 agreements, a system which has saved us in the last period. So we'll look into that.
Earlier this year, Greek Cypriots went to the polls to elect their leaders. President Spyros Kyprianou's party retained power, but despite the acclaim of its followers, its position is weak. In order to remain in office, it's had to form an uneasy coalition with the Greek Cypriot Communist Party, AKEL. President Kyprianou is likely to lead the negotiations with the Turkish Cypriots, at least until the 1983 presidential elections. The Turks are disturbed by the weakened position of the Greek Cypriot leader and the rise of the extreme left and right. But they're more concerned at the outlook on the Greek mainland. In October, Greece has a general election in which there is every possibility of a left-wing government coming to power. The Turkish government hopes that Mr. Kyprianou can be persuaded to accept a formula which a new mainland Greek government would find it difficult not to endorse. But over years of negotiations, Mr. Kyprianou and his Turkish Cypriot counterparts have made little progress. Do the new Turkish proposals represent a real breakthrough?
Well, I wouldn't describe it as that. There are some changes in the Turkish proposals on the territorial aspects from the previous ones. They are not satisfactory. On the constitutional aspect, their position is exactly the same. No progress at all. But again, it's not simply what the Turks have put forward now which matters, it's what we really have in mind, and whether their position is to negotiate or simply put forward certain things for propaganda purposes and leave it at that. That will show in the course of the negotiations. And I would say that there must be a sort of agreement on the actual objectives. What do we want? And if we agree on a truly federal system, I'm sure it will not be impossible to find a way out. And when we say a truly federal system, that means also guaranteeing the essential freedoms and rights of all the citizens of Cyprus. And of course, the territorial aspect is of importance, and whatever other considerations are going to be taken in mind, the population ratio cannot be ignored.
President Kyprianou took over as chief negotiator for the Greek Cypriots after the death of Archbishop Makarios. The shadow of Makarios still looms large in Cyprus. A memorial service at his tomb in August was attended by the Foreign Minister of Greece, the first visit by a senior Greek politician since the invasion. It was a sign of the intense international effort assisting what might be considered the best attempt yet to solve the Cyprus problem since the Archbishop's death. Makarios had begun his political career as an advocate of enosis, union with Greece. In 1959, he dropped this demand and accepted a compromise which was to lead to independence for the island the following year. Through the 60s and early 70s, he strove to hold his fractious state together. He was overthrown in the military coup of 7 years ago by Greek Cypriots who felt he'd moved too far in accommodating Turkish demands. Toward the end, Makarios appeared to accept that Cyprus would become a federal state, a constitutional compromise which would give Turkish and Greek Cypriot communities a great deal of autonomy. Now, 4 years after the death of Makarios, his successors still argue over the correct constitutional formula. There's a great deal of distrust and apprehension over what the intentions of each community are. The Turkish Cypriots suspect the Greek community of wanting to reimpose their political and economic dominance. The Greeks accuse the Turkish Cypriots of wanting a share of the land and political power out of all proportion to their numbers. At times, this gulf has seemed unbridgeable. Now that the Greek Cypriots have rejected the latest proposals, it might seem that nothing's changed. But it has. The Greek rejection was no surprise, and the essential thing is that the talks are continuing. There's hope, fragile but real, that Cyprus may, at last, be on the road to peace.